You don't actually lack discipline. You just keep walking away at the exact moment something starts to matter. There's a quiet pattern in your life that no one really sees at first. It looks like ambition. It feels like potential. It begins with excitement, with clarity, with that rare moment where everything inside you aligns. And then something shifts. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just enough for you to pause, to hesitate, to tell yourself you'll come back to it later. And somehow, later never comes. You've probably experienced this in small, familiar ways. You start a project with intensity, mapping everything out in your head, only to abandon it halfway through when it no longer feels perfect. Or you pick up a new habit, feel proud for a few days, and then quietly drop it the moment life gets slightly uncomfortable. Or maybe you've told yourself, I'll finish this when I feel more ready, but that feeling never fully arrives. There's a subtle weight that comes with this. Not failure exactly. More like unfinished echoes of who you thought you could be. And what makes it harder is that you care. You don't quit because you don't want it. You quit because something deeper interrupts the process. Psychologically, this often connects to something called avoidance coping. It's not laziness. It's the mind protecting itself from discomfort, from perceived failure, from the quiet fear that finishing something might expose you. Because finishing means being seen. It means being judged. It means facing the possibility that it might not be enough. Researchers like Timothy Peichel have found that procrastination is not a time management issue, but an emotional regulation strategy. You're not avoiding the task. You're avoiding the feeling attached to the task. And studies from American Psychological Association suggest that people often abandon goals when the emotional cost outweighs the immediate reward. So your mind quietly redirects you toward relief instead of completion. And over time, certain patterns begin to form. You start strong but lose momentum when progress becomes slow. You jump between ideas, always chasing the initial spark but rarely staying for the difficult middle. You begin to associate effort with discomfort, and discomfort with stopping. You tell yourself you just haven't found the right thing yet, even though the pattern follows you everywhere. It's like building bridges halfway across a river, then turning back just before reaching the other side. Each attempt feels real, each beginning feels promising, but none of them lead anywhere solid. And that can feel exhausting in a way that's hard to explain. Because it's not about failure. It's about accumulation. The accumulation of almosts. The quiet tension of knowing you're capable of more, but never fully stepping into it. And it's important to say this clearly. This isn't a flaw in your character. It's a learned response. A protective mechanism that once made sense. At some point, stopping early felt safer than risking disappointment. And your mind remembered that, so it keeps repeating it. Not to hold you back, but to keep you safe. Even if that safety feels like stagnation. There's a moment in every unfinished journey where things stop feeling exciting and start feeling real. This is where most people who never finish what they start quietly disappear. Not because they can't continue, but because the emotional tone changes. The beginning is full of possibility. The middle is full of uncertainty. And uncertainty has a way of activating something deeper inside you. You might notice how your motivation fades the moment things become repetitive or unclear. You might start questioning whether it's even worth it anymore. You might feel an urge to restart, to find something new, something that gives you that initial rush again. This isn't random. It connects to a concept known as the dopamine reward cycle. Your brain is wired to seek novelty and immediate gratification. When a task becomes predictable, the reward signal weakens. And according to research by B.F. Skinner, behaviors that are not consistently reinforced tend to fade over time. So when progress feels slow or invisible, your brain interprets it as a lack of reward. And it gently pulls you away. But there's another layer to this, something quieter, something more personal. Finishing something requires you to confront yourself. It forces you to see your limits, your imperfections, your inconsistencies. And for many people, that's uncomfortable. So instead of pushing through, they step back. They tell themselves they'll return later, when they feel better, when they feel more capable. But what they're really doing is avoiding a version of themselves they're not ready to face. Over time, this creates a subtle identity shift. You begin to see yourself as someone who starts, but doesn't finish, and that belief quietly reinforces the behavior. You hesitate before committing fully. You hold back a part of your effort. You leave space for an exit. And without realizing it, you're protecting yourself from the very thing that could change your life. It's like standing at the edge of a deep ocean with a boat you built yourself. You trust the design. You trust the direction. But the moment the shore disappears behind you, doubt creeps in. The water feels endless. The destination feels uncertain. So you turn back, telling yourself you'll try again another day. And each time you return to shore, it feels a little more familiar, a little safer, but also a little more limiting. And this is where the pattern begins to escalate. Not dramatically, but gradually. You stop expecting yourself to finish things. You lower your standards to avoid disappointment. You start measuring progress by how quickly you can move on, rather than how deeply you can commit. And the gap between your potential and your reality quietly widens. It's not loud, it's not obvious, but it's there. And you feel it in those quiet moments when you think about everything you've left unfinished. At some point, something shifts. Not because everything suddenly becomes clear, but because the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. You begin to notice that it's not the projects that are the problem. It's the moment you decide to leave them. You start to see that the discomfort you've been avoiding is actually part of the process. Not a sign to stop, but a signal that you're moving beyond the surface. And this realization is quiet, but powerful. It changes the way you interpret your own behavior. You begin to understand that not finishing things isn't a lack of ability. It's a response to emotional friction, a habit of retreating when things become uncertain. And once you see that, something inside you starts to loosen. You don't need to become a completely different person. You just need to stay a little longer than you're used to sit with the discomfort instead of escaping it, to continue even when it doesn't feel exciting, not perfectly, not consistently, just slightly beyond the point where you would normally stop. And that's where something new begins to form. Not motivation, but resilience. Not excitement, but steadiness. You start to build a different relationship with effort. One that isn't dependent on how you feel in the moment. And slowly, the pattern begins to change. You finish something small, then something slightly bigger, and each completion feels different. Not dramatic, just real, grounded, like placing the final piece of something that once felt impossible to complete. And the most surprising part is this: the fear you were avoiding doesn't disappear. It just becomes less controlling. You realize that finishing something doesn't expose your inadequacy, it reveals your capacity. And that changes everything. Because now, the unfinished parts of your life don't feel like evidence of failure. They feel like invitations, quiet reminders of where you can return, where you can continue, where you can choose differently. And that choice doesn't need to be loud or perfect. It just needs to be yours. So the next time you feel the urge to walk away, pause for a moment. Not to force yourself to continue, but to understand what you're feeling, to notice the discomfort without immediately reacting to it. Because sometimes, the only difference between who you are and who you could become is the decision to stay when it would be easier to leave. And maybe that's what finishing really is. Not reaching the end, but refusing to abandon yourself in the middle. If this resonated with you, take a moment to like and subscribe and share it with someone who might need to hear it. What is one thing in your life you've been quietly walking away from?